So, morning everybody. Welcome to Talking Niagara. With me, Peter Giblett, and him, Dave Wheeler. Dave, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. Yeah, I'm pretty good. Had a skunk-free morning.
Did you see the debate last night?
I did, and we should discuss that at some length.
Yeah, well, let's start there. I joined it a little bit late. They were talking. There was basically when I joined it, they were talking about abortion and abortion rights. Now,
Yeah, that was one of the places that that Kamala Harris won. She had a pat answer. She had a well rehearsed little speech about that, and Trump could not do anything with it. He was all
Trump
over.
claimed he was a leader on IVF law.
Yeah, he did, but he never really was able to take whatever event. Now that should have been one of the things he would been able to explain that would reduce the effect of Kamala Harris. Little speech there about abortion and how dare you kind of speech, these women, and all that, and then he goes on and on and on about killing babies after they're born, or ninth or eighth or ninth term in the pregnancy.
He was completely out of order there, because there's nobody who's recommending you kill babies at seven or 8 months.
Yeah, only if it is severely challenges the woman's life, then yeah, that would be an option. If something went terribly wrong and her life was at risk, that would be an option. If aborting the child would save her life, that sort of thing. And what Trump
that's a rare circumstance, though, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. And he did not sound convincing almost all night long. He had no wins. I think that, generally speaking, having watched the whole debate and then watched and then listened to the analysts later, they what happened basically is Kamala Harris didn't really have much. She had a lot of joy and happiness and going forward and that kind of thing, which I expected that she would have. And she had a couple of well rehearsed speeches. One was on the abortion thing, but she didn't. And she probably would have ended up with a tie if Trump had kept himself. You know, if he was able to control himself, but he wasn't. She discovered pretty early on that she could get under his skin. And before the debate happened, I was texting a friend in Florida who is surrounded by the MAGA people, and she doesn't like Trump. And I said, I have my reservations about Kamala winning. She might just tie. And I said, the only hope she has is to get under his skin. If she can get under his skin and make him ramble on.
Yeah.
And she did.
The one thing he rambled on about, he said this 4 or 5 times, is how crime has gone down in other countries because their criminals have come to the United States and crime is going up in the United States. Right.
Yeah, and he didn't have any facts to back that up.
He didn't have any facts to back it up. Yeah.
So he said that a couple of times.
Yeah,
he looked pretty desperate there. He wanted to always to bring the conversation back to the immigration, and he could have scored huge points on the migrants coming in from the border if he had kept his head, but he did not. He rambled on about he wanted to put the fear of God into everybody, but instead he looked like a babbling idiot.
Yeah.
He could have made huge points on immigration. He could have made huge points on her flip flop of of fracking, and he could have made gigantic points on Ukraine. His one and only good answer during the whole debate was when he was asked if he wanted who he wants to win. Does he want Ukraine to win the war? And he says, no, I want to stop the dying. Then he exaggerated about the numbers that of men, young men that were dying, and he rambled on about this and that. And that would have been the point where he could have taken the lead in the debate. He could have looked as if he was the moral, righteous guy that wanted to stop a senseless war. And that's
the area where I think both on Ukraine and Gaza, he was much stronger than Harris for. But when it comes down to things like law and order, I think she had him beat, every way there was.
Yeah, she didn't have him beat. He beat himself. And that was my biggest, I couldn't believe that he was torpedoing himself. He was self-destructing right there on the screen, which I did not expect. I can say that I knew she had to get under her skin if she was going to win, and she did. And she took full advantage of that. And when the mics were off, she still goaded him along. You could say, hey, it's my turn to speak, he would say, because she couldn't believe her. I think probably when she was being coached for this debate, she had all her pat answers and all that other stuff. And they probably told her, look, if you can get under this guy's skin, that's the way to do it. And once she did that, it was all over. And I think the turning point was really when Trump said, he kept trying to bring it to immigration because that's, in his mind, his strongest point. He started talking about illegals going to a town, Springfield, or I don't know, whatever it was, and eating the dogs and cats of the pets, people that live there.
Truly disgusting. And there's no proof of that.
There's no proof of that. And if people are eating dogs and cats, it might be more of the homeless. And he could have said something like that. But he said these illegals are coming. They're so depraved that they'll go to a town like Springfield and eat the people's dogs and cats. Now, what he could have done, which he should have done, he could have put strong arguments about the stresses and strains that are happening all over the United States with migrant populations showing up in the most remote cities and towns and really taxing their ability to deal with the ballooning numbers.
That would have been a winning point for him. That could have been a winning point for him in that regard. Like we have.
There is a town in the United States where they have a lot of trouble with the Haitians driving. Haitians get behind a car and smash them up and go through red lights, and they're terrible drivers. Whoever gave them a license, I don't know. And quite often, they don't even have licenses. They buy a car and drive it around, and they don't know how to drive. He could have brought stuff up like that, things that were true, things that were really in the news. But he didn't. And he didn't talk about the stresses and strains on governments, local governments, and people due to this vast amount of illegals coming into the country.
Yeah,
but no.
And that would have been
what he did. He says, "Oh, they're eating your cats and dogs."
Yeah, that would have been a winning point for him. Instead of which, he just every time he made this point about criminals being entering the United States.
Yeah, he just kept rambling on about that, and he switched the topic over to that. He must have thought that immigration was his number one issue, and when he talks about illegals coming and eating dogs and cats, I if it even happened, it would have been a rare person that had done that, and it would have been an extremely desperate person. Even if the illegals are not welcome in a town, they certainly are agencies there that will feed them and clothe them.
Yeah.
And he could have brought up the mass amounts of migrants in New York City that can't be taken, how New York was a sanctuary city, allowed all these people to come in, suddenly decided we don't want them anymore, put them in a bus and send them somewhere else, including the Roxham Road. He really, really blew his advantage badly there. And the one thing, as I said, the one positive note is he said he wanted us, when asked if he wanted, who did he want to win the war? Did he want Ukraine to win? He says, no, I want the dying to stop. And then he went on to exaggerate the numbers. But if he just kept on that point, and then
I know.
And he did say that the war would have happened if he was in power, and there was no wars going on when he was in power.
Well, when it came to the war situation, you know, and him saying there were no wars going on while he was in power, or at least no, he actually said there were no. He got to a situation where there were no U.S. troops available in current wars or something like that.
No new war started, and he could have made a big issue with the Afghanistan thing, and he blew that. He blew it. He just destroyed that. He had negotiated. Now, Kamala Harris tried to say that Trump negotiated with the Taliban. He had the Taliban in Camp David and all that, and she was very indignant about that. And he really could have turned that on her, saying that, you know what, I had to talk to who I had to talk to get our troops out of there, and I'll do it again. And that whole indignity she had would have just failed her right then and there.
It's true. That is very true. He did start on that. He did make a statement on that, but I think it was badly handled.
Yeah, no, he couldn't. He couldn't make his point well. He couldn't make his point well the whole night, because he kept wanting to switch back to the massive amounts of criminals that are coming into the States. And how the crime has been reduced everywhere in the world except the United States, because they send all their criminals here.
There was an interesting.
No government is sending it. Like, it's not like Cuba sending all their criminals to Florida. What happened back, but it was in the 90s or something like that. Certainly, any government, if it could chase its criminals out of its borders, it would, but not with the direct means or intent that they go to the United States.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then one thing that you know, he also made a point. He said when he was in power, Iran was had no money, was a broke nation, and now they're a very rich nation and funding all this terrorism. I don't think Iran was a broke nation at all. Iran always had money as a source of has rapid source of income. It gets money from oil.
Yeah, it can sell its oil anywhere, anytime, and as a matter of fact, the American companies that do business with Iran just do it through a proxy now. They do it through Kurdistan or Uzbekistan or whatever else. And he could have brought that up, those kind of things, but he didn't do it. So he was all over the planet, and things that he could have made a big score on was the tariffs and things that he had put in, his administration had put in, and the Biden administration kept. There's all kinds of things that the Biden administration kept when the Trump administration left. And he could have really gloated on that one. He could have said, look, you're doing what I did here, you're doing what I did there. And he really did not take advantage of that, and he could have. And he just really blew it.
There were,
I expected the best Kamala could have had was a tie out of this, but he lost. She just stayed stable and kept goading him on. He wants to destroy himself. Let him destroy himself. I'll just say
there
things,
was,
keep saying
there
things
was
that
an
will get
interesting,
under his skin.
there was an interesting one on the international front that I remember, is that she said Putin will eat you for lunch and spit you out afterwards.
Yeah, well, she got away with that because of
Yes.
his work. Now he could have countered. Like
Oh,
I
yeah, he
talked to
could have
Putin.
done.
I talked to Kim Jong Un. Remember, Obama was going to go talk to Jong Un, and when I went to talk to Jong Un or Kim Jong Un, everybody criticized me. I tried to cool places down. I went to talk to Xi. I've talked to Putin. I've done all these things, and guess what? The result was no war. As soon as I leave office, you got a big bad war going on in Ukraine. You got this never-ending war going on in Gaza. The Ukrainian war looks as if it's going to be a forever war, and he could have said that. He could have said that this war started under your administration. You let it happen, and not only that, it's going to go on forever and ever. And it's another forever war like Afghanistan or like Iraq or like Vietnam. It's a non-winner. It's going to just exhaust the American finances. It's going to disrupt the world. But instead, he turns on Europe and says, "We're the ones that dumping the biggest money. Where's Europe doing?" That would be a valid point if he could bring that argument home, but he didn't. He just starts his exaggeration thing, and he gets off topic, and he brings it back to the massive amounts of criminals coming into the nation. Now, the Biden administration has blown the border thing. They did a terrible job on the border, absolutely terrible job on the border. They had to do something near the end of Joe's administration and put stronger controls down there, but they didn't do that. They didn't do that the whole time when they could have long ago. But there was an election coming up, and they had to throw some restrictions on the border. He could have taken advantage of that. He didn't.
But again, Harris made the point in that the Republicans voted against the bill that they'd put forward for the border control bill.
Yes, indeed, and it would have just died if he could counter that argument with all the things that he did do. Like, for instance, the amount of immigrants coming over the border during his time was much reduced, and he could make the argument that he had a better system, and he could have said the only reason why they're now within months of the election putting on stronger controls and reducing the flow of migrants over the border is because there's an election. As soon as that election ends, off that will come. As he made the point of in Pennsylvania, as soon as she gets into office, she'll go back to her fracking thing, because that was a real weak point for her, because she was sanctimonious about fracking, how bad it is for the environment. It's terribly bad for the environment. And then she changes her stance and says, we don't have to reduce fracking now. It's still an environmental nightmare. Well, how come your environmental stance is all of a sudden watered out by the fact that you're in Pennsylvania right now, and fracking is a big deal there? They make a lot of money out of fracking. So he could have worked on that. What he says is, as soon as she gets in office, she's going to ban fracking. And she also, to my surprise, said that that she's going to encourage as much energy, fossil energy exploration as possible, and production of oil and gas, to make sure that the United States is stable. That would have been one of So she kind of was able to diffuse one of Trump's strongest
Yeah,
points.
because she's saying, let's bring all this stuff inland. Let's make sure that we're dealing with, we're not importing oil.
Yes. Not importing. And right now, the United States is not importing a whole lot of oil. The United States is the largest producer of oil in the world right now. And it has many, many reserves, and it has decades worth of oil that it can use domestically. So that was a reach on her part, because that had already begun to reduce when Trump was in office. And so he was going to say, we have to be energy safe. We have to be energy secure. So we have to have more and more oil in order to do that. Well, she took that argument right away from him by saying that she's going to do that. Now, here's the environmentalist that goes along saying, well, okay, well, fracking's okay all of a sudden, and producing more oil, the most oil that we ever have is really okay. So she has decided to sacrifice the environment that she may have had for a bigger reach, and that is the ordinary American, who right now the environment is on its back burner when they're looking at the costs and inflation and all other things.
Well, actually, one of the things I found is that when it came to, like, there was a closing argument, I thought that she was talking about the need to be a new way forward, talking about change, policies for the future. She was giving what I would classify as nice thoughts. But in many regards, I'm saying, well, okay, nice thought, but how you gonna do it? It's how what would happen in an election here is everybody's saying the same thing, but the question comes down to, how is it going to be possible? How is it going to be achieved? And I think that's where her arguments broke down, is the how it's going to be achieved. Then when it came down to the closing statement by Donald Trump, he's back on this statement about criminals entering the United States again.
Yeah, that was his end thing. I don't know. He just kept going back to that and exaggerating and making a pile of rubbish out of something that could have been his strongest point. Now, when her sum up was the weakness. I thought that she would display throughout the debate a lot of empty feel-good rhetoric. You bad, me good. We're going to go forward, wonderful, and all these other emotion-driving type of statements that don't need substance. And pretty much that's all she's ever done on the campaign trail right now. But Trump had a better ending, except for the very last couple of sentences. He had good, strong points. And his ending was pretty good right till the end, when he just dumbed it up again. And he could have made points about, there wouldn't be a war. I'll stop the wars. I'll get that stopped. I'll stop the massive sort of infusion of American tax dollars overseas when we have massive, huge debts, and they're growing every day. And how are we supposed to sustain a war like that, and a war in Gaza, and then be prepared to take on China? And how can we take on Iran? I'll make a deal with these guys. He could have done all that, but he didn't. He just blabbered on.
Okay. And one point, Peter Baker says, Harris won the debate because of the novelty factor. We already know Trump's biggest hits. He shouldn't keep riffing away on those old chestnuts without a proper update.
Yeah, and he just his exaggeration and his loss of thought and his keep returning to the massive amounts of criminals coming into the country. that really didn't carry much weight. He'd have to have some
There's
sort
no
of
proof.
statistics.
Yeah. There's no
But I
proof
really
on
do think the cats and dogs thing was the thing that sank him. I don't think he could have ever recovered. I mean,
cats and dogs.
Kamala Harris could have been singing songs after that, or make one mistake after another. But Trump would never, ever. That's going to be a joke on him throughout the rest of the campaign. People are going to go meow meow bow wow every time they sing bow wow meow meow.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And it's like that's a real bad thing. It's like cats and dogs. The only time I've ever heard that really been used before, and this was in Britain, it was when we had a large influx of Chinese people in Britain, and especially the new back in the 60s and 70s, especially with the new implementation of Chinese takeaways and that. And people would say, and I think it was a real bad taste, jokingly, but I think it's a real bad taste joke. Look out, you're eating your cats and dogs if you eat the Chinese. I think that was disgusting. I think that was racist. I think that was absolutely, wrong. And the cats and dogs thing here was absolutely wrong.
Yeah, as far as Chinese people cooking cats and dogs, well, as long as I don't know it, I'm okay because the food tastes pretty good.
Well,
and what about like, we got all kinds of things like that too. Like we got we used to have the story of the Italians when they came into the country and they decided to take up moose hunting like other people did, and then they would come home with a horse, a dead horse strapped to the car.
Yeah, and most of these are just blatant lies. Got no basis in reality. Absolutely. All right, coming back home. Right? Does Niagara have an infrastructure emergency? The new commissioner of public works has basically said, his name is Terry Ricketts, who's taken over public works portfolio, is basically saying that 44% of water assets are in poor to very poor condition, and 80% of regional water capacity is delivered from 3 plants that are over 100 years old. And there's a collective backlog of $280 million worth of repairs on these plants.
Yeah, so the terrified is the first word of the title. Report shows Niagara is in an infrastructure emergency. And of course, the subtitle then is about 80% of regional water capacity is delivered through 3 plants, roughly 100 years old, with a collective backlog of $280 million in overdue investment. And I believe this.
Well, you notice I'm not going to use the emotional terrified, because my statement doesn't. It just asks the question whether we have an emergency.
Well, I heard that one of the problems is, believe it or not, is our illegal immigrants coming and eating cats and dogs and throwing the carcasses in the water and plugging up the plugging up the drains. No, yeah. So actually, with the budget season around the corner, now this is I find that maybe the terrified thing is an overstatement, but I do believe that the bean counters will deflect any kind of measure for maintenance sake. And it says there's $280 million in backlog of fixes that we have to do on these aging structures. And as long as it's working, a bean counter will say, well, later. They do that here in the city with their trucks and stuff like that. When they keep breaking down and it's very obvious you need a new one, but it will cost $80,000 to fix an old one that will last less than a year before it has to be done again, instead of spending $250,000 and getting a new one that won't need fixing. They look at the 80,000, not the 250,000, and can't make, and that's the kind of thing that'll happen. And I think this is probably the same sort of attitude when it comes to these places, when they put in the reports, we need to fix this, we need to fix that, we need it. Well, is it working? Yeah, but we need to fix it. It's, it's worn out, and we better be proactive.
Yeah.
I feel that councils and city staff are not proactive when they look at things like that.
Yeah, Karen makes the point that when Salty was mayor, they spent a huge amount on updating our water plant here in Niagara Falls.
Yeah, it's a good one, Karen. And however, this is in addition, 80% of the regional water capacity is delivered by 3 plants, all roughly 100 years old.
Yeah.
And as I said before, but also that 90% of the regional wastewater capacity is delivered by 4 plants, roughly 50 years old, with a backlog of $400 million in overdue investment for equipment.
Yeah.
They're using wooden paddles, and leather straps are still in use. Equipment Ricketts equipped didn't come from the Supervisor Council and data acquisition enabled 75 years ago. Okay, so there is big capital expenditures that are on the way. We know we have a new sewage treatment plant going to be built soon in and around Rexinger Road area there. So that'll take off some of the strain of the system. When I was there, so obviously these things are, and this is, I saw this. This is not just government, but I saw this in industry too. When the maintenance people tell you you're going to have a major failure if you don't fix this. It's running that for now, but if you don't fix it, it's getting near the end of its life, and you better. I saw that happen in the refinery. They had a massive explosion that they pushed the equipment and they didn't repair it. They made massive profits, and all of a sudden, guess what?
Yeah,
they had a major downturn, which would have eaten up all the profits they had made plus. Because they and I think the same sort of attitude happens in city. No one looks proactively. Here's an old truck here. We've got this plow truck, and it is nearing the end of its days, and we can't always just go and get it fixed all the time. There's a point where you don't keep fixing your old car, you get a different one, don't you? And I don't think they see it that way. When you get a whole bunch of failures in your equipment, then you finally do something about it. But if that happens in the water plants, you are without water.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. And the part of the problem here is that let's face it. We walk on roads. We walk on roads. We drive on roads that are more than 100 years old, maybe even 200 years old. Some of them. There's not necessarily anything wrong with them just because we're using old roads, old infrastructure. Sometimes you've got to adapt the old. What's important is actually, can you put modern, can you drive them, still use that old technology, but use the modern tools with it?
I don't really follow you there. Where's the 200-year road here?
No, I'm saying we've got some in the city that are really old roads, right? What I'm saying is sometimes we have to actually just adapt the old infrastructure to the modern way of doing things. Like we've built new roads on top of old roads in the city, right?
Oh yeah, well, definitely the timing of replacing sewers and water mains underneath the roads are essential. they were able to find, to their credit, they were able to find a way of increasing the lifespan of the old cast iron pipes they laid down way back around the time of the war, or just before, just after the war, by putting an electrical charge through the pipe, a minor electrical charge that would stop the corrosion of the pipe. So they were able, theoretically anyway, to increase the life of those pipes by 50 years, which is pretty awesome if you ask me.
Yeah.
But there are other, but normally speaking, you have to replace something after it gets a certain age. And what happens is you get major failures, and then you have major capital expenses all of a sudden.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. And what we should do is a better job at planning how we replace this older stuff.
Well, they finally put it into the city plan to replace the fleet of vehicles in the city. So they were able to do that. Now that was long overdue, because a lot of the maintenance equipment that the city workers were is pretty bad shape. It's very old, including their vehicles. So they were able to implement that in the planning. So they were able to look a little bit proactively. Now they let it get too bad, and they wasted a lot of money fixing something that was absolutely unfixable, at least not for, it would only maintain itself for a short period of time. So they at least did that. Now this, I don't know why it's all of a sudden terrifying of these water plants and sewage, or aging sewer plants. Somebody knew about this. Somebody has been reporting on this year after year after year. You know, the guys who are running the sewage plants, and you know the guys that are running these aging water plants, that they are asking for repairs. They're asking for modernization.
Yeah.
But like I said, if the water keeps running, they put it on the back burner, until all of a sudden the water's not working.
Yep. I know. We're driven by desperation rather than planning it.
Yes. Well, now they are. They changed the way they're attacked. They're saying, this is a very, very bad problem. And I think the example of Calgary, when Calgary had a terrible water issue there, months of bad water delivery, and they had to really redo a whole lot of work. That was, I think, probably, a red flag to any other municipality that was using aged structures to deliver water. What could be more important than water? Not much.
Yeah. All right. We'll move on to something else in a minute, but Gary Wilkins raises a point. He says, word on the street is that Wayne Thompson stepped down. We hear anything about it? I haven't heard anything about it. Let's keep an eye out for that, Dave.
With all due respect to Mr. Thompson, it's time. It's long overdue.
Yeah.
I believe that probably Wayne is probably sick. He does not look good in the meetings. He's Biden-like in the meetings, and I think that he has served the city as well as he could. And no matter what you think of his policies or anything else like that, I tip my hat to him. He's devoted his life to serving the city.
And I have to say that is the same case with both Waynes. And I would also ask the question in relation to Campbell, because he's not in the best of health either.
Indeed, he isn't. And I think that it may, I don't know, with Wayne, it may have been his way of dealing with his illness to at least focus on something. But he doesn't sound nearly as bad as Wayne Thompson. Wayne Campbell, though, can he really, is it realistic that he can devote as much time to the council when he is unwell as he is? I don't know about that, but Wayne Thompson, he would not win the next election anyway. I think that he looks feeble. and sick, and he sounds Bidenish, and before it gets really bad, he's got to get out of there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I'll leave it at that, and we'll be looking at that story in the next few days, I think. Okay.
You have to face up to the march of time sometimes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you do. And that's the same with both Biden and Trump as it is with our elder statesmen in the city.
Well, Trump was the Biden last night. I can tell you that. He wasn't quite as terrible, but he looked pretty terrible. He looked Biden-ish.
Okay. 650,000 people have taken advantage of the dental care program to date, according to Federal Health Minister Mark Holland. It's like he's promoting this NDP Liberal platform, even though the NDP has now parted ways with the government.
What was that again? Sorry, I was concentrating on something else here.
No, I was saying basically, okay, so what I was saying is 650,000 people have taken advantage of the dental care program so far, and the Liberal government's still at work on policies it promised to pursue under the now defunct deal with the NDP, according to Health Minister Mark Holland, Federal Health Minister Mark Holland. And basically, what they did is they've rejigged the process in July, so dental offices could skip having to register in advance and process individual claims instead.
Well, yeah, this is an article I put in a couple of days ago, didn't I?
It was, yeah.
Yeah,
we didn't get to it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know what the point was, is saying that it probably is saying, well, you know what, Jagmeet did a good job for us all. We got 650,000 people on dental care. I'm not so sure that those are accurate. I've heard of people going on this dental program and being happy about it, but I haven't heard. I think it's a little bit too early to say that if it's a success or not. It certainly looks good, looks positive. I don't know how much it's going to cost the government, though.
Yeah.
And in all things, when they complain that the conservatives are going to reduce services, the conservatives then counter with, somebody has to have fiscal responsibility. You can't keep paying for things that everybody wants if you don't have the money to do it. And we're in terrible debt, and it just keeps growing. And you can't, of course, the government's going to give you anything you want close to the election. So is the dental thing sustainable? Is it going to permeate throughout the whole sort of population? And remember, the dental lobby is very powerful in Ottawa. They have a strong, powerful dental lobby. That's why they're so expensive. I mean, that's why they all stick together and have the same sort of pay schedules and charging schedules. Every one of them is like a big guild. I tell you what, I won't undercut you if you don't undercut us. And we'll use our lobby power in Ottawa. So if the dentists are being properly compensated for this dental care, it'll keep going, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I think and I don't know how much it will expand throughout the population, children and older people and seniors. Yeah, that's really good. Especially children. I mean, free dental care and consistent dental care for children from the time they teeth right to the time they're young adults. I wholly support that. Absolutely. Because that's where they're going to learn how to take care of their teeth. That's when they're going to, and we do know that oral health has a whole lot to do with the rest of your health and how that works. I know I have to take antibiotics before I even get my teeth cleaned, because I've had some major operations. And what happens if the infections in your mouth get into your bloodstream? They go right to those weak areas where you've had a new limb put in, or a broken bone or two. So they'll go right to those weak areas and infect them. So there's and oral, and you want to be able to eat. You want to look nowadays, like, you want your teeth to look pretty good as best you can throughout your life. You don't want to have to go through the expensive procedure of having to replace teeth, like those anchors, like in your teeth, and put new teeth in if you can help it. So I think it's very, very important for young people to do that, to be covered. Seniors, probably the next most important, because they have less wherewithal and money, and many of them aren't covered by benefits. I'm very lucky. I have benefits. A lot of people don't, And then when it comes down to the rest of the population, if we can afford it, that's the way to go, I would say. But we can see what's happening to our healthcare system now, and how failed it is, and how it's not really responding too well. It's overtaxed. I think that has to be taken into account too. Can we deliver adequate dental services for everyone that are better than the healthcare services we are getting today?
And that's a fair question. That really is a fair question. With all of that. Okay, so what comments do I have? At this point, dental plan is chewing on the right side. At this point, my dental plan is chewing on the right side, said Peter Baker.
Well, some people's dental plan is to put their food in a blender and eat it because they can't nothing to chew with. So then, and like I said before,
veg and gravy in the blender, that works well. Yeah, like that.
Yeah. Well, I can see somebody going through the drive-in. I'll have a triple bacon cheeseburger, please. Blend it to its a puree, and then give it to me. So
oh my God, no, thank you. Oh, that's horrible. That is a horrible thought there, Dave.
a puree burger.
Does this mean you've got to have a seniors McDonald's? Is it?
Yeah, there'll be a special line for it. A puree line.
Oh my God. All right. Well, thank you. I think let's move on to the question of, is Canada transforming its energy usage? Catherine Swift, who is president of the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses of Canada, says that we're being fed by the politicians a bunch of fairy stories, and that the politicians should be ashamed of themselves. We've got this constant barrage of messages from governments, corporations, third parties about how we are in the process of a massive transformation about fossil fuels. And she says the trouble is, it's all a lie.
I'm not so sure it's all a lie. I think North America has not adapted itself well enough to take on things like, one of our big complaints here is the EVs, and how the companies are turning their back on it, and how consumers supposedly are turning their back on it. However, I just keep seeing more and more EVs. There's one or two in my parking lot here. One of the people here owns a Colt, and the problem, of course, is the electrical usage and the hype. She writes a pretty good article, but she concentrates on certain aspects and does not include others. Now, she says that the average person is not going to be motivated to get EVs or to transform our power to more green because of the predicted apocalypse that was going to happen. All of a sudden, islands disappearing and this or that happening in the atmosphere. To counter that argument, another person could have written the same article saying that's essential that we do go this way and use real data and without scare tactics say this is what's happening in the climate, this is how we fix it. And
well, I actually think we are turning things around, and I use this example of this industrial park that I remember from like a long time ago when I first went out to work. I went for an interview in this industrial park, and in that industrial park there was actually there was a coal-fired power station powering one of the factories, and it wasn't the only factory in that place that had its own energy and had its own power station. But the fact is that that's gotten green. That same place got green over the years, and that's natural. That's was a normal course of events as far as I was concerned, because electricity was produced in a different way. And the factories produced electricity in a different way. They've gone to a greener solution over the years. And I think that was natural. And I think it's the question about the hype around electric vehicles. One of the problems there is that I think that if electric vehicles were the same cost as gas vehicles, I think you'd probably find 20-30% more people would go buy them. If they were 10% more, probably you'd find 15-20% people more buying them. But if because they're like 40% more, because a lot of people are going, well, hang on a moment, I've got a budget for this for my new car. I can't get the electric vehicle.
Well, if the environmentalists were really honest, they would open their doors to Chinese electric vehicles. The Chinese make very good electric vehicles. Aside from Tesla, they're right behind Tesla in the quality of their electric vehicles, and they can sell them in Canada for about $11,000. $9,000 in the U.S. And if the environmentalists were really think the urgency is now, we have to do it right now, they would push the government to open their doors for cheap electric Chinese vehicles. Of course, that would take that would upset our economy terribly. So that couldn't happen. So there you have this rock and hard place. Do we improve the environment quickly? Because the argument is if we don't do it now, things are going to be a disaster. And one of the ways to do that is to open the doors to a very good electric vehicle that comes in from China, and it could be undersell anything we make and is better than anything we make aside from Tesla. So in terms of, and this is the crux of it, she is saying that the solar and all that isn't really working that well. And she says, in terms of energy currently consumed in Canada, the number one source is refined petroleum at about 40%, with natural gas a close second. The total fossil fuel energy sources represent about 75% of total Canadian demand. International data show similar trends, with demand for fossil fuel-based energy remaining stable or even increasing in some cases in forecasts for the next couple of decades. And then she goes on to talk about sort of corruption in and among agencies that hype electric vehicles or electrification. It says, and another relatively new buzzword, electrification, also contains its share of dishonesty and misrepresentation. Electrification refers to the goal of having all energy provided by electricity and having all electricity generated by non-fossil fuel sources. Despite all the hype, electricity represents less than 20% of all energy consumed in Canada at present. The notion that Canada will be converted to an all-electricity energy system within a certain time frame is a pipe dream that is unrealistic, unaffordable. Politicians supporting such fairy tales should be ashamed of themselves. Now, she has some really, really valid points there. What we always hear is if everybody has an EV, there won't be enough power to supply the power needed for the EV. If we are currently 75% dependent on fossil fuels for our energy, the heat for our houses, the gas for our cars, that sort of thing, how are you going to switch that around? And the heat pumps that they're putting out there are good, provided you're in the more southern parts of the country. They don't work well in the more northern ones because of the cold. They haven't been able to overcome that yet. So she has some very, very valid points there, although they're all pretty much one-sided, but she makes strong arguments. And her articles are always really good to read. Now you have to take it with a grain of salt because she's far-right conservative and all that. But I wouldn't even say far-right conservative, but staunchly conservative in her economic outlook.
She's a conservative, but she also actually is looking at these things from a, I think, from a practical viewpoint, from the practical viewpoint being that of the manufacturer and how they their processes in order to make these things work. There's a massive infrastructure change required for electric vehicles. And if we were to all convert to electric vehicles tomorrow, the country isn't prepared for them.
No, well, and one of the things that why EVs are not being sold faster, mostly it's economic, just like you said. It's mostly economic. And if they were really, really serious, the Greens were really, really serious, they would insist that the government open its doors to electric vehicles coming from offshore. And if that happened, millions of us would change over to electric vehicles because they'd be cheaper.
But then again, lots of people would potentially, lots of people from existing car plants would lose their jobs.
Precisely. So there's the rub. That's the rock and the hard place I was talking about before. Your government, let's say the Trudeau government, has insisted on all these energy requirements. They want to reduce the production of oil and gas out west to meet their climate targets. And yet, if they were really serious, they'd open their doors for Chinese cars. But they can't do that. So if they did, presumably the reduction in fossil fuels would reduce dramatically. But nobody does that because it's not worth cleaning up the environment that fast and torpedoing your own economy. That's why we have 100% tariffs on Chinese. We might have 200% if they're able to make them even easier and cheaper. Now, here's reports on EVs continue to worsen, she says. Auto companies have delayed or dropped plans to produce EVs as demand plummets. EV battery plants, in which Canadian governments have invested massive amounts of our tax dollars, look increasingly like white elephants, soon to be made obsolete by technology. Past purchasers of EVs talk about how they will never do that again. Now, in my experience, I know of one person that won't do an EV again, but I know of others who will do EVs like 2 or 3 times. My buddy's on his second, and he loved them. So the EVs have now been around for a few years. A used EV market is appearing yet. Those buying EVs have terrible tales about their batteries failing and all that. These are all the early early hurdles that a new technology being introduced to the
Absolutely,
country
they are. Yeah.
Would normally face. I mean, the combustion engine faced this, and the robust resistance to the combustion engine. If you look at the advertisements back in the day, you see a car, an old car being stuck in a ditch, and a happy person with a horse and buggy riding by.
Yeah.
The person's the company that eventually started making Buicks, McLaughlin, I think it was, in Canada, used to have those kind of ads because they made buggies, and their big thing was uh, those gas engine things are just junk. Um,
Ours are
but
built to last. Yeah.
yes, and but they quickly saw the future and they transformed their plants into building
Yeah.
Buicks at the time, I believe it was. So
Yeah.
I think it's
Absolutely.
just growing pains. I think it's growing pains because we see electric cars being very successful everywhere else in the world. Brazil are using them. When I was in Portugal, there was all kinds of them. There was electric buses. China sells half of the EVs there are in the world, and they sell them off outside of their country in places like Thailand and other places in
Yeah.
Southeast Asia. I think it's just a
There
matter
was
of
that. There is the same sort of thing. The question about, buses. You raised that point about buses, and the trouble is, electric EV vehicles being more expensive means that, in fact, whilst it would be wise for things like Niagara Transit to transition to electric, that transition's probably going to have to be a slower paced one, not buying 15 electric vehicles all at once.
they had electric vehicles back in the early 2000s, and they torpedoed it.
Yeah.
The oil and gas companies bought up. GM destroyed all their electric vehicles they had for rent in
I know.
I think it was LA or something like that. So they got rid of them completely. Oil companies bought the leading battery technologies at the time, and withheld investment. So they bought them, and then they dried them up. The guy who was the leading battery scientist of the day, or the guy who had the factory, took on the money expecting investment. What he did was he got lack of investment. We did this to ourselves. These EVs that we had back in the early 2000s could have been hugely efficient today, because there would have been 20 years extra technology and money and investment put into them.
And we haven't had that.
Because the oil and gas company
Yeah.
and the car company felt they would make more money per car if it was a combustion engine.
We'd have been a lot further down the line had the electric vehicle had that electric vehicle of GM been continued to be on the market, had that turned around at the time in the early 2000s, we may have had a better infrastructure today. Right, here in Canada, I have to say our infrastructure is pretty bad.
Yeah, and that all could have been fixed if they could get the blinders off and start to work with new technology. China, on the other hand, took the technology that was developed over here and refined it.
Of course.
And we're able to do a long-term plan. They saw the need for electric cars. Their own country is beset with the worst pollution ever. That was one of the big motivations to get electric cars, because I know I was in China, and I always thought it was a foggy day when I first got there. Oh my God, there's all sorts of fog here all the time. It was smog, not fog. Even when we landed in the airplane landed, I thought, oh, we're landing in the fog. No, we were landing into pollution. So they were motivated for more than one reason, and they took on the technology and did a long-term plan. The problem with our economy here is based on quarterly profits, and investments are based on on realizable quarterly profits. And So that's the motivation of most investors, is how I get, things out month by month. The original capitalists back in England and then later in America had much longer term plans and ideas. When they wanted to build a railroad, they would take a big loss to make it, and knowing little later, like it might take 10 years, but they're going to make profit. Some of the most builders and industrialists in Britain had a long-term plan, and they did too here in the United States. Take Carnegie and others like that would look to the future and invest 10 years or 20 years. Now we invest for quarters. We invest now, and we demand a result right away. We don't want to hear about if we invest now, it'll be fruitful 10 years from now.
Yeah, and you think exactly about that. That when they built the original London Underground system, they built it. It was one of the biggest things that was ever made, and it was entirely privately funded. By the way, privately funded. Let that settle in. And it was one of the biggest expenditures they did. And a lot of it was because those that funded it knew that if they could get their workers from one part of London to another more effectively, more efficiently and faster, they could get that it would be better for their business. And it proved to be so.
Yeah. And the fact that they didn't look for immediate returns.
Yes.
So if you're on the stock market, you're going to invest in the London tube system, and you look, well, it's not really going to bear much fruit for 5 or 6 years. So why invest now? If I hold on to that,
in fact, actually,
what I could do is invest in this ship full of Black people going to North America and make a quick return on my buck.
Yeah, and exactly. The thing is, sometimes we have to think longer term, not shorter term.
Yeah, it's we have a city plan. The government has a plan going forward for years going by, but I think this should be a unilateral, bipartisan or tripartisan committees to kind of plan for the future a little bit better. We have a time frame in which we can improve the country and make it stronger and wealthier, but we have to plan ahead more than we are now.
Yeah. All right. I think we're going to call it quits at that point.
Yes, indeed. And without further ado, I bid you adieu.